Hello, Seth Parks. You're looking very dapper today.
Thank you. I remembered that we had this and I was like, well, I better put on a little mock neck and a little jacket.
Love it. That's a wonderful look. It's very French, I must say.
Oh, very fitting.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you so much for being here. I want to just say out loud that you're a very good friend of mine and you've helped me on numerous projects. And maybe we can just jump straight in, Seth, and tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So my name is Seth Parks and I'm Director of Development at Guy Walks Into a Bar Productions here in New York City. And we develop film and TV scripts across all genres. And we just wrapped on a film that we're producing and that my boss also wrote and directed. It's called God Spy, and it's the true story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a World War II. During World War II, he was a German pastor who stood up against the Nazis, was also involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler and helped Jews escape. And sadly, he lost his life in a concentration camp about 2 weeks before everyone else was liberated. So it's a tragedy that is just absolutely packed with hope. And I mean, just it's amazing. It's an amazing story. It went really well. And I'm super excited to be going into post production on it and bringing it out to the world. And we've got a whole smattering of projects that are in some form of development, a couple of books that we're currently developing into TV shows. One is a post-apocalyptic novel from the 40s that was honestly incredibly prophetic of what a global pandemic would be like. And the other is a really sweet story of a young girl in middle school who's suffering anxiety. And she rescues a goat who becomes her therapy animal, and she winds up being able to break some chains of anxiety. And I think it's an incredible conversation for kids to be able to have. And I told the author immediately, I realized how much anxiety I had as a child that I had never thought about. And like that's a word that we throw around a lot today, but when I was a kid, you wouldn't. I'd never heard that word before,
Mm.
and you certainly wouldn't be accepted or encouraged to talk about it if it was a word that you heard.
Hmm.
Um, and I was like, this is giving kids a language for things that they need to talk about, and so that kind of shows you the whole gamut of we do stories from all over, right? We did Elf, we did Sully,
You,
so
I tell you what threads everything that you guys put out there is that they're positive and they're human affirming, right?
yes, yes,
Across the genres, across the whatever the storyline is, whatever the time
yeah,
period. And I think that your collective positivity shows, but also individually, all of the team that work at the production company all have the same kind of outlook on life, which is there are so many amazing stories to tell. Let's concentrate on affirmative ones, right? This
yeah,
because we know what's
yeah,
going on, right? Let's put some more stuff out there. And if you're helping kids, young adults, teenagers navigate those years. You can't have enough of those types of books. And you're right, we didn't have those things growing up. It was just get on with it.
yeah. Get on with it.
Just
Toughen
get on
up.
with it. It's just normal. That's what everybody goes through. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so that speaks to really your passion for getting beautiful stories out there, and it kind of nicely dovetails into another passion that you have, which is to help authors, writers get out a story that is in good shape. Let's just put it that way, because a lot of
Yeah.
people have
Yes.
talent. So tell me how you got into that and what drew you to editing work.
That's a great question. I think my it was a really interesting transition, or it's not like a transition from one to the other, but it was more of like picking up this other thing that I never thought of for myself. Something about me is that I actually grew up with dyslexia, and
Wow.
reading was really, really difficult.
Mm.
And I mean, talk about anxiety. There was nothing worse than having to read out loud in front of other people, or just be handed a book and you have to do a book report and it's 200, 300 pages. And I'm still to this day a slow reader, but I learned to read very carefully so that I didn't miss things. Dyslexia your brain will jump ahead
Mm-hmm.
and or fill in things that you didn't actually read, and you realize that you've gone a few pages and you're not sure what the story, like what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And what it did, which always felt like this terrible thing to me, and I hated books, right? I gravitated to movies and they spoke to me and I could understand them and I could like handle them. And but what came out of it is that I learned to read really carefully. And then as I started my work in the business and as director of development, editing, just constantly giving notes on scripts. And sort of my mental self, I could say, like, oh, this is a script, it's 120 pages at most.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no anxiety coming up about it. And I realized that my slow reading, my careful reading was a real asset to being able to see the whole story, to
Mm.
not miss a single detail or something in an early scene that could come back and be a really powerful moment for a character in a later scene. And then I really, it was reading probably, honestly, The Custodians. Like,
That's my book, just so that people
yeah,
know.
which is Jacqueline's
So
book.
that's how we met through other friends, but Seth
Yeah,
very kindly offered to help me with my book, which we're going to get to why you need to probably do that before you submit.
yes.
So, but yeah,
Yeah,
so
so we had known each other 5 or 6 years before I even read that book. And I'd read books for work, but that was the first time where I kind of made this connection that what I do for scripts, I could do for books,
Mhm.
and then understanding how it's just like longer arcs, more detail. It's divided into chapters instead of scenes, but
Mm.
there's still characters, and the art of storytelling is the core thing. And that's what we're always striving to do, whether it's a script or a book. And so and then getting to share my notes with you on Custodians, and you were, gracious enough to say, I would love to hear your thoughts. And it just sparked a connection where I realized that like books could be this amazing thing. And to tell you the truth, it was kind of healing for me I had so much fear as a kid of books. And
Mm.
then now here I am, like really enjoying working on books. And um,
Oh
it's,
wow, that's beautiful. And it was a big book. I mean, it
yeah,
was a very long book and there were different time scenes in it. And Seth and I talk about the book actually in another video, which will be in the
yeah,
same channel. But I want to just say that what really grabbed my attention about Seth's abilities, I'm talking about you right now in the third person, but you know what I mean. It's that ability to zoom in on the absolute minutia detail, but also Seth has the vision which comes from the his education and his work with movies to see the scenes like these huge sweeping scenes that maybe run many, many chapters, but in a film would be maybe a couple of scenes. And he has that you have that breadth and scope and depth and vision. And if you can find an editor that possesses those qualities, my God, you're off to the races because there were so many things you brought to my attention, which I want to talk to you about because
yeah.
what in your opinion are some of the most common mistakes that folks make when they're really close up to a novel?
Yes, that's a really good question. I think that the first thing that comes to mind is when you are writing, it's a really lonely endeavor, and it can feel very much like writing in a vacuum. And like you said, you're so close up to it, and you're so close to the characters and the world and the story. Um, and I think a lot of times, because you're a human, you can focus on one thing at a time, right? So you come into this chapter
Mm-hmm.
and you work on it and you write the next chapter. And then let's say you finish it and then you're going back over and if you have multiple storylines, it just gets even more complicated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the thing that I see is that you can miss some of the larger arcs or connections that can be made, as well as I would say mistakes, or not mistakes, but just kind of missing something in the pacing of the story.
Mm.
And I think that's why it's really important to work with someone who can be your creative sounding board. And the I would say I really wanted to say this, that the creative or the mistake that I see the most is not recognizing the need for a creative soundboard
Mm.
and feeling some kind of pressure that comes from the world that we live in that says you need to write your voice, you need to write the next great novel, and you need to accomplish this on your own, and to be able to say that it's yours and you didn't have any help. And I think that's such a bad way to look at it, because I would never in my life, I could give you a million notes, Jacqueline. I never put pen to paper. Like, you are the writer. That doesn't change. And when you work with really seasoned writers, they understand that. So
Mm-hmm.
they receive the notes, they don't take it personally, and then go back and they rewrite, and they understand that you're helping the story become better.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that acceptance of help or another perspective, even if we always say there's no such thing as a bad note, even though I've heard horrible, awful, terrible notes. But if you hear a terrible note about a certain chapter and a certain character, it's not that that person's note is good, but maybe there's something that they're bumping against that they don't have the words yet to understand, and it's worth a second look. And you might
Mm-hmm.
find a third thing that you realize is even better for the story. And so I think the openness to a creative sounding board, which I like to say rather than editor or, whatever it
Yeah.
might be, is
Yeah.
because they're not going to be taking the writing from you.
Mm-hmm.
It's your book, it's your story. It lives, and for me, my work is one, helping the writer tell a better story, and two, defending the writer and maintaining the integrity of the story they want to tell. I would never force someone to tell a story they don't want to tell. No one should do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen people not walk away from that situation and it doesn't end well. Or I've seen people walk away and I have a lot of respect for that. And that can be very difficult to do. But, maintaining your integrity of this is the story I want to tell is so important. And so that to say, it's important to have somebody who can look at it, because you're so in every scene that you're not going to be able to read it with with the mind of a reader, someone who just picks up a book. And that's what I always do as an editor or producer or whatever, whether it's a script or a book. I am reading to give notes, but I'm also reading as a fan, as an audience member, as a reader who's going to just, like, I'm in the airport and I see this book and I pick it up. What is my reaction? What is my experience? And so I want to be able to see that, the characters that we meet in chapter 1, 2, 3 is going to really take us somewhere by chapter 20, 25, 30, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, by the
Mm-hmm.
end of the book. And so it's really helpful to have that outside perspective, because you don't even realize how deep you are in it and maybe they can offer just even just ideas or perspective on what they're receiving when they read, which is
Right.
so helpful.
That's really valuable. And I think personally, from my own experience, some of the biggest mistakes that writers can make is thinking that they really understand and know their characters. Because when somebody who's partnering in a project with you says, "Well, why did he do that?" and you don't know why he did it, then you really don't know. So because you don't know, that's a call to go deeper and say to the character, "Well, why did you do that? What possible motive was there?" So there is this other dimension that I don't like editor either. I think you're right. It is more of a writing partner who basically just says, you know what, I didn't understand that scene. Are you sure that's how it would have gone down? And your first reaction is, oh my goodness, oh, is it rubbish? And then you go, you know what? He's got a point. I really need to look at that. And almost from a movie point of view, like just play it back in your mind as a movie. And the first round of notes is always the hardest because there's always a lot. There's some big slashing and burning for anyone's writing. Um, and I would just say, and I'm sure that perhaps you can add to this as well, is you just take your time. You just literally step back. There is no rush, right? You really need to take your time.
That's a really good point. I think you made two really good points. One, the way that you referred to the characters and another person seeing the character versus you, the author, seeing the
Hmm.
character. Even the way you stated that phrase in question, it's that the characters are outside of you. The characters are outside of the author. I think we hear a lot this idea of, oh, you need to find your voice as a writer. You need to find your voice as an author.
Hmm.
And that I kind of understand what it's saying, but when your characters' voices make the author or the writer invisible in the sense of you forget someone is writing this and you just hear characters that are alive and living and breathing,
Hmm.
that that is what you want to achieve.
Hmm.
That's gold, absolute gold. And that's always what I want to help an author to achieve, help a writer to achieve. And the idea that the characters live outside of you, I think, is so vital and so important to understand. And, that's why I really enjoy working with Jacqueline because she has a great understanding that her characters live. And it's amazing because you put them down like a painter, you splash it onto the
Hmm.
canvas, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
character, and she was born here,
Hmm.
and this is how she interacts with the world. This is how she treats people she loves. This is how she deals with conflict. And it's
Mm.
like, how did that even happen? I don't know, but I can see it. And I think when
Yeah.
you write a great character, you can see it. And we had such a good time on. I think on it was difficult, but we had a great time on Custodians, which you should watch the video, which is in this channel on
Hmm.
Custodians. But finding like the American characters,
Mm.
which you put out there, and together we just said, I remember saying, like they were having all this conflict.
Mm.
And I thought, they're having all this conflict, but like the one guy who's so annoyed by his friend is not leaving. He's not leaving him. He has this, whether he wants to admit it or not, he has some sort of love that's deep in there. They've been through something together,
Hmm.
and there's a deeper connection. And I was just like asking you all these questions of like, where
I was like, wow, yeah,
I know
that's
and
true.
it was so funny to have that experience with you. And I was like, so like you said they knew each other in college. Okay, like what happened? Like how did he? Because he was
Yeah.
annoying then too. Um, and I thought that was such a fun example of how they live outside of you. And then the other thing was time,
Yeah.
and that's so
That was the hardest thing for me. It was
So
the
hard.
timing. Yeah.
It feels almost impossible because when you say it out loud, like, it's going to take me 5 years to finish this book, that's daunting.
Hmm.
That makes you not even want to pick up a pen or tap on a keyboard. That I don't believe that's the way to think about it. And I really encourage all writers and authors not to think about it that way. But if you can find the endurance and the longevity to keep coming back to your book, keep coming back to your story, keep coming back to the characters, keep rewriting, slashing it. Yeah, the first round is going to be slash and burn. And then you may even get further in and get a whole bunch of notes from somebody like an
Hmm.
agent or an editor or some, publisher. And you're going to have to, you feel like you're back at the drawing board. But if you can push, push through that, you can find almost perfection. And I really like, I want to put that into perspective because think about the amazing things that you've read. Just think about your favorite books or
Mm.
your favorite films or TV shows. I guarantee you there was 5 or 10 years put into those stories that you don't even realize.
Mm.
You, as a viewer, they come out, right? It feels some authors, it's like, do they release a book every 6 months? It seems insane, right? But the reality is that great art, great writing takes time, way more time than you think. But
Hmm.
in dealing and going through that and enduring it, you can find something special. Because it's really, to me, I think there's a lot of talented writers and people out there, and it's easy to find good stuff. It's easy to find solid writing, but to find great writing, to find amazing stories, that takes time. And that's more rare than you realize.
I think that's something that we can apply to every human experience when people put time in and they don't see it as a quick return, but rather a devotional vocation. So, people can ask themselves, why do I write? Right? What
Mm,
am I writing? And I when I talk to authors all the time, I say, look, let's ask the question, if this never got published, what does this book bring you?
mm,
And 9 times out of 10, the author will light up and I'll say, right, that's it. That's the magic right there. And what I would say also about the process is that your loved ones will readily, you know, ask to read your book. And that's a beautiful thing. And you should absolutely ask your friends and family to read your book. But there is a point where using a focus group to or giving people permission to really just be very, very honest after you've worked with an editing partner is also very beneficial,
yeah.
because people have different things to bring in. But then wouldn't you say, Seth, that there is a point like with anything that you could untie it, unpick it, right? At what point do you say that it's done?
That's a really good question, and I would say it probably varies, unfortunately, project to project. But yeah, I think you need to figure out. Um, it should always start with people that you trust.
Right.
So getting that feedback. Okay, let's say you've gone through the process and you've gotten it to a place that you really believe in.
Hmm.
Then start, taking it out. Um, if that means submissions, trying to find an agent, right? And start getting that stronger, real feedback, that kind of
Yeah.
marketplace feedback.
Hmm.
And maybe what comes back is something you hadn't thought of because, book agents and publishers, they have an even different understanding. And I think there's so many talented people that work in those industries. And if you can really find someone who will take the time to read your work, that's a win. That's a huge win.
Really
And
is.
it's almost impossible to get people to read. And um, it's a celebrate that if you can find it, and also just, seek out their honest opinion and seek out what it is that might be missing or why it's not ready. And, you know, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to go back to rewriting,
Mm,
but it's sort of, I guess you could look at it as steps of seeking out higher opinions in a way, of like starting with just a trusted friend, and then
hmm
starting with someone who has some experience, who's a fellow author or is, has experience with editing, and then go talk to an agent if you can, or somebody, or a junior person at a publishing house. Like, work your way up the steps,
mm, mm,
and uh,
hmm
don't be afraid of their honesty. Never, ever be afraid of their honesty, because no one is going to put the nail in the coffin of your work. It just doesn't even, I mean, no is, you have to think about no differently. No doesn't mean never. No doesn't mean you're not good enough.
hmm
That's just, they have like that publishing person has 100 things on their plate, and they have all the pressure of making money from the books that they need to sell, and they have a job and they have a family and they have rent to pay, and they have this stuff going on. And just understand that it's not a person passing on your work or not responding to it is not necessarily a reflection of your work.
Right. Right.
And I would definitely encourage authors to never pick apart their work, because you said, yeah, you could endlessly pick.
hmm
Um, Another mistake that I see a lot of times is that writers or authors will, kind of turn something over and say, oh, hold on, wait, I've got a new draft. Like, I wanted to tweak this, I wanted to tweak that.
mm
And maybe even after answering all the notes that the person had given them, they're kind of finding things for themselves that they need to rewrite and pick apart. And that is a hamster wheel. That's never going anywhere and it's never going to end. And you don't, if someone you trusted handed down notes to you and you feel like you have addressed them, you can have that conversation with them. Don't go looking for things that you think need to be tweaked in some way, because I've seen writers start to mess up parts of
Right.
their work
The
where,
plot, the timeline.
yeah, they're picking apart a certain scene, and they don't even realize that because that scene ended a certain way,
hmm
there's a scene later on where that character comes back or something they talked about comes back, and it was actually a really powerful moment that we earned from seeing it there. And when they changed it and they picked it apart, and because they felt they needed to rewrite, it damaged the work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's like a Rubik's cube, you know? There's
yeah,
so many twists and turns before you lose
yes.
what the
Yeah,
plot.
I know what is a good way to think about it. Trust when something is good.
Yes. Thank you for saying that because
Trust when something is good.
especially for a debut author, a debut book,
Oh yeah.
they're getting all this advice. And let's be honest, you really do also want to find a partner that has integrity and not somebody that necessarily likes to create more work for themselves. I mean, be very mindful, go with your gut, go with your heart. If what they say perhaps doesn't make sense to your overall vision, then trust that, thank you very much. Trust it and then continue on like Seth says, it's not you have to do it this way or no way. Okay. And I've got to say that the options now are so open and you've got all these, self-publishing, you've got hybrid publishers, you've got agencies that also publish and there's free presses. There is so much choice that honestly, if you really believe in your story 100%, you can push it to and find your market. You know, and
Yeah.
we haven't really talked too much about the marketing aspect, but would you say, especially in the business that you're in, should people, as they're writing something, say, now, wow, there could be a real application for a movie, or that would really tap into what's this demographic over here is really interested in? Is there any of that going on, or would you say, like, keep that to the sidelines and just write the book?
Yeah, that is a great question. My advice would definitely be to keep it to the sidelines and
Hmm.
write the book that's in front of you, write the book that's in your heart, the
Hmm.
story you want to tell, and trust that if it is an idea that lends that you immediately, if you're thinking that because you're thinking the idea kind of lends itself to TV or it lends itself to being in a movie and something you would want to see, then just trust that that journey is going to take place when the time is right. That, there are people like me that are actively
Exactly.
reading books and looking for stories to tell and looking for stories to adapt into film and television. Um, and
Mm.
it's books are such an asset today in Hollywood. I can tell you that because if you have they call it IP, and if you've got IP, then all of a sudden you can have a conversation with the studio. All of a sudden, people are more interested to listen to like, whoa, what is this story that you have? Like,
What do
there's
you
a
mean by IP? So do you mean that you've taken it all the way to publication? So you have something like bricks and
yeah, and
mortar.
I don't even mean that it's necessarily like we're not talking bestsellers. We're not talking.
Yeah.
I mean,
Amazon number
we're
one,
not
for
even
example.
necessarily right. We're not even necessarily talking that it is published
Right.
because IP is a magazine article. IP is a short story. IP is it stands for intellectual property. So it's
Hmm.
your book proposal could be
Right.
the thing that becomes a project. So don't, yeah, I would say don't stress about that aspect of it.
Hmm.
Um, because that could be something that happens after you've told the story. But just yeah, write the story that's in front of you because the more powerful and honest and the better your characters are, the more likely someone is going to see the value it has for film or television.
Mm, beautiful. I think this is a perfect place to close our conversation, Seth. Thank you so much for your time. So you're open to people approaching you on a select basis, right? Because I know that you're really, really busy these days.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think definitely if, I'm always open to hearing from
mhm.
people and then I can figure out
Yeah,
if
you
I have
can figure
time
out.
and I have a little baby at home. So, I gotta weigh everything in
Hmm.
balance with work and family and all that.
Hmm.
I'm always open to hearing something, and if the project makes sense and is something I want to be a part
Beautiful.
of, I'm open to it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we'll put your information underneath so people can reach out appropriately. But thank you so much. Absolutely lovely to dialogue with you. And no doubt we'll be doing it again some point soon.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye, Seth.
Bye.